everybody. Kenneth the K-Rock Klein here, coming to you live from, well, a different location other than my normal apartment in Beaumont, Texas. But actually, I'm at my folks' place right now. They're actually out of town as of this moment, but they're on their way back and should be back in safe and sound as of this podcast. And so I figured, you know what? Why not just do a quick podcast real fast? Because obviously there's a lot going on, and certainly in my area, down in southeast Texas, as well as I'm sure we all probably know by this point, there's a hurricane on the way. And yes, another hurricane is about to hit landfall. In fact, it's probably the first hurricane of the season, Hurricane Beryl. And I gotta tell you what, they are running out of good names to come up with hurricanes that, they just decided, let's get a little creative here, because you're used to seeing storms like Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Katrina, and I don't know, maybe a Hurricane Susan or something. You might want to go through all the list of all the hurricane names we had here. But now they're starting to get a little creative with these hurricanes as well. So they're just starting to, once hurricane makes landfall and causes a lot of damage and destruction, which people will definitely rebuild and get themselves back on their feet afterwards. But once that usually happens, they'll usually retire the hurricane name and go from there, because I don't think anybody will ever come up with a Hurricane Katrina after what happened in New Orleans back in 2005. So it was a very, very difficult, it's a very difficult situation right now, considering that we know that it's going to hit, and I'm hoping that it's not going to cause as much destruction and damage as Hurricane Harvey did back in 2017. But it is kind of worrisome, especially when, you're from Houston, and I'm still considering myself a Houstonian, even though I currently live in Beaumont right now. But you're from that area. Obviously, you're going to get some rain. You're going to get some flooding. You're going to get, all that stuff. You're just hoping that it's not as significant as what Hurricane Harvey did, or, hoping that it isn't as bad as Hurricane Ike or Rita. But, it is what it is. You have to be prepared for these kind of storms, especially as well. So as of right now, I am at my parents' house, away from the office. Now, I don't know if I'm going to go back to, if I'm going to actually be at work as of this podcast. I'm still keeping out for some updates and everything. There hasn't been any significant updates as far as, how much Beaumont will be hit by the storm, because it's supposed to come in on Monday, and, I'm just keeping my options open. I'm not, I'm hoping, maybe we can get back to work, but we're still keeping an eye on the storm as of now. I haven't gotten any word from my employer as far as, what the situation is. So I'm keeping my eyes and ears on that. But right now, I am currently at my parents' place just outside of Houston, and it's definitely going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few days. But I wanted to come on and do this podcast to kind of talk about my fears with regards to this storm, and the one thing that I don't think we need to have a discussion about, or I think we need to have a discussion on this, but I don't think we should be having expectations of what could possibly happen and everything. This is something that is kind of bothering me, and I'm trying to figure that out as well. So I'm coming on here to talk about it, but I'm also going to be talking about Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. Should he be considered as one of the next up-and-coming quarterbacks, and what are the Packers going to do with him for the future, given the fact that their quarterback history has been tremendously talented, but have they wasted the prime careers of some of their best quarterbacks in history? Because in my personal opinion, and I'll get more into this, I think the Green Bay Packers from 1992 to 2022 with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers are considered to be like the 1990s Atlanta Braves, where you have some great teams every year, almost every year, a Super Bowl caliber team. You only make it to 3 Super Bowls and you win 2 of them, which, for a 30-year stretch, that's okay, but when you think about what the Patriots did or what the Kansas City Chiefs are doing, you have to think that they should have been at least in a couple more. So I'm going to talk more about my thoughts on the Green Bay Packers situation as well. And But first, I'm going to be talking about this upcoming, this potential storm, and what I really hope should not be the case when it comes to sports fans, particularly in the Houston area. So I'm going to take a moment, stop right here, and then I'm going to come right back, and we will be discussing my thoughts on this potential storm that's about to hit down Texas or so. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. So we are back, and I'm going to be talking first about the storm that could potentially come into effect. If you're listening in Houston and you have no idea about this whole weather situation, just feel free with me. I'm currently reading KHOU 11's weather report, and this is what they're saying. As of 1 p.m. on Saturday, which is today of this podcast, Beryl remains a tropical storm with winds at 60 miles per hour as it heads toward the Texas coast, the National Hurricane Center said. The forecast track from the National Hurricane Center brings Beryl onshore along the middle Texas coast as a hurricane early Monday morning. The cone, however, extends to include parts of southeast Texas and Matagorda Bay. Even a glancing blow from a strong Category 1 hurricane will have impacts on the coast and inland, with a heavy rain threat in play for the Houston area on Monday and Tuesday. Heavy rain is expected to be the main threat, with a band of 5 to 7 inches or more expected around the center of the storm as it moves inland. With Texas in Beryl's path, the KHO 11 weather team is calling for weather impact alert days on Monday and Tuesday. Hurricane and storm surge watches have been issued for portions of Texas coast from the Rio Grande River and north to High Island. Right now, the exact landfall on the Texas Gulf Coast remains uncertain, but the latest forecast shows a landfall somewhere north of Corpus Christi, southwest of Surfside Beach. It is crucial to stay on top of this forecast throughout the weekend. Now, I'm looking at this storm right now, and the tracker says that it should hit the coastline around Corpus Christi on Monday at 7 a.m. So if you're in the Corpus Christi area, you need to be prepared for that. And then Brownsville, you'll be first hit on the coastline around Sunday night at 7 p.m., so tomorrow night at 7 as of this podcast. So you need to be prepared for that as well. But right now, looking at things, and, well, I mean, I see that Beaumont is not quite in that vicinity of getting hit, not in the cone tracker that they usually have. If you look on a weather map, they make like this cone where they have a wide range of areas covered in this cone, and I don't think Beaumont is in there, but that does not mean I don't think it's going to get hit with anything, so maybe some showers and storms and flooding as well. But I know that Houston's going to get hit with that, and then it's going to go right up through Waco. This is like all the rain stuff and everything, so, potential flooding, and it should weaken out by about 7 a.m. On Wednesday at least. So the more inland it goes, the weaker it might get. But again, I'm not a hurricane specialist and everything. So right now it's listed as a tropical storm, and just trying to see if if it is going to happen, that we are going to be in for a disaster declaration sometime either today or so. But yeah, so it is a tropical storm, but it could strengthen back to a hurricane as far as, what I've been reading at least. And, obviously every city has their faults. Every city has their flaws. I mean, you go out, if you live out in California, you're going to get earthquakes. If you live out in like the New England region area, you're going to get snowed on, or same thing in the Atlantic coast. Like if you live in Florida or South Carolina or anywhere else on the Atlantic coast, you're also going to get hurricanes. In Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, you're going to get tornadoes. I mean, every place gets tornadoes, but, you're more likely to get those in that area just for that. And that's not to say that's not me recommending you immediately leave because of that. I mean, if you love it there so much and you are willing to oblige and stay by the rules, then you know what? Hey, that's your choice. You should live in that area because that's where fate or the good Lord wanted to bring you there. So, but it kind of it's kind of bothering me right now, thinking about this potential. I mean, I hope it's anything serious like it was, back in 2017, where we had like 51 inches of rain, and there was massive flooding for days, and and at that time there was a lot of uncertainty because of the storm that had just gotten hit. But the thing, though, that is bothering mostly about it is because I know there are a lot of Houston fans, sports fans, that are kind of eager for this to happen, or at least have this impression that there are some fans down there that are eager for this to happen because, hey, guess what? The last time that we had a massive storm hit, we had a hurricane came down. What happened? The Astros won the World Series that year. And I still say they would have won it that year regardless, okay? I'm not going to talk about all that extra stuff because I think it's pointless and I don't think it would have made much of a difference anyway. But the reason why I bring all this up is because I think people are kind of, getting a little excited because they believe that, hey, guess what? We're going to have a hurricane, that's probably going to come in, or a tropical storm at least. We'll get some flooding, and then, it's going to happen, and we're going to win the whole World Series again. Now, as of right now, the Stros are picking things up a bit. They are a couple games out of first in the AL West, but I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that they are a contender as of now. But if they're in the playoffs, you better keep an eye out for them because they're still dangerous as far as I'm concerned, especially if you're in the National League. But my thing is this whole storm talk about, what happens, like when something tragic or destructive happens to a city, it usually leads to a spark plug for the entire, a sports franchise, something positive that happens. Let me give you an example. So 9/11, arguably the darkest day in U.S. history. 9/11, when both the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were struck by hijacked aircraft and lost over 3,000 lives, and that included the number of those that unfortunately perished in the Pentagon, when it was also hit, and then a fourth plane that fortunately didn't hit a target, but it crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. So we had a loss of 3,000 lives, but New York was the one that got hurt the most. And what happened following that was a remarkable run for the city of New York. The New York Mets, a couple of days later, Mike Piazza with a 2-run homer to win a game for the Mets against the Atlanta Braves, a division rival for them. And then the New York Yankees, who were in the midst of their dynastic run of winning 3 straight World Series, looking to make it 4 in a row, they have this incredible playoff run where they lose the first 2 games in the divisional series against the Oakland Athletics. Derek Jeter makes this remarkable play in Game 3 to keep the Yankees season alive. They win Game 3, they win Game 4, then they come back to win Game 5 to complete the comeback. Then they steamroll the best team that year, the Seattle Mariners, who had won an MLB record 116 games, a record that might not be broken for some time. And they just steamrolled them. 5 games, they're in the World Series. And then the 2001 World Series, one of the greatest World Series of all time between the Yankees and the Arizona Diamondbacks. New York won all 3 games at Yankee Stadium, which included 2 incredible clutch moments, both coming in the bottom of the 9th inning, both coming in with 2 runners, or down 2 and a runner on base, and against the same closer. Both were 2-run walk-off homers, or game-tying homers for that matter. And the Yankees would go on to win those games in extra innings. So, and obviously Derek Jeter with the walk-off homer in Game 4 to win and even the series out. And that was the first time that baseball was actually played in November. And obviously the reason for that was the whole situation with 9/11 after baseball got postponed for a week. And so you had that, and then, of course, the Diamondbacks came back to win that series in 7 games. But then, of course, you think about the New England Patriots, who represented America. They had an incredible run all the way to the Super Bowl, where they upset the St. Louis Rams in dramatic fashion. And you can love or hate the Patriots all you want, but you cannot deny that 2001 team was probably the most beloved Patriots team ever because of what they represented, not only to their city, but also to the entire United States, because Robert Kraft, the owner, once said that we are all patriots, and tonight the Patriots were world champions at that Super Bowl. So it's a remarkable feat. But then let's fast forward to Boston, the Boston Marathon bombings. You have, obviously, 4 people at the Boston Marathon lost their lives in the bombing, and then there were numbers that were injured. And that had a real effect on the city of Boston. The Boston Bruins would go all the way to the Stanley Cup final, and actually had to come back from behind to win a Game 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs just to, win that series over Toronto to advance onward. And then they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup finals, but they lost to the Chicago Blackhawks. And then the Boston Red Sox made it all the way to the World Series and won it in that city after a dramatic turnaround where they finished, I think, with the worst record in baseball the season prior. So, yeah, that's something that typically happens. And then, of course, you think about New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina. The Saints had this incredible turnaround where, they after playing most of their away games in 2005, you go on to reach the NFC Championship game in 2006. And then 3 years later, you finally win your first Super Bowl. And that was a huge turning point as well. Now, some people might question the Saints' championship because of another extracurricular activity that was going on. But you know what? I don't care about that either. So at this point, it's kind of, it is, the Saints were obviously the champions. And people should recognize that as well. But, see, my thing is, when something tragic happens, sports tends to be a healing point. And for, it's a rallying cry. And sometimes it usually leads to teams winning championships or getting close to winning championships, bringing some hope and inspiration to the city. And I'll tell you what, one of the most underrated things that doesn't get talked about from that 2017 year was Lufkin's Little League baseball team, who went on this incredible run all the way to the championship game in the Little League World Series, even though they ended up losing. So that's something that gets talked about. But what I'm saying is sports are typically healers. They bring people together, or they're supposed to bring people together. I know we're in a different society where people are more divided than ever, and sports is supposed to be one of the most common things that brings us all together, especially when a city is affected by a tragedy. And I sometimes wonder if we are being under this illusion that whenever something bad happens to a city, and our sports teams are going to rally around and bring this community together and try to win a championship. Does it necessarily mean they're going to win it that season? No, it doesn't, because we've seen time to time that it never really happens. But I sometimes think that people kind of get this idea that if something bad happens, guess what? You're winning a championship. Well, nothing happened to Arizona in 2001. Nothing bad happened. They really were reeling in the tragedy that happened in New York, just like every one of the other 48 states. And Arizona ended up winning the World Series that year. Nothing bad happened to Chicago in 2013, and their Blackhawks were the ones that won the Stanley Cup over the Boston Bruins. And nothing bad happened to the Indianapolis Colts, who ended up winning the Super Bowl in 2006, beating the Chicago Bears, who did beat the New Orleans Saints. So I just wonder if this is kind of what people are thinking. Hey, it's going to happen. Like, if the city gets destroyed, gets a tragic thing happen, then the sports team's going to win a championship. I know that when Hurricane Harvey happened, I had a funny feeling that something good was going to happen. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it was going to revolve around the Astros, who were, really good and were starting to get ready for their dynastic run, which is still ongoing as of now. And I just had that funny feeling that something was going to happen, something good was going to happen, and it did. And I'll still say to this day that it was the most magical thing that's happened, for me in my life, the best sports moment of my life. I don't care what everybody else says. But I get this fear and this worry that, even though it does seem like, reading from the weather reports and such, that Tropical Storm Beryl is mostly going to be it's just going to be a tropical storm and it might not have as much impact, it still worries me. Because the last thing I want is to feel like tropical storm is coming, we're going to win another World Series. And as much as I would like to win another World Series to, really show that we are a dynasty, even though we technically are a dynasty, but really elevate our dynasty status, I don't want it to be because of the storm. I don't want it to be that way. And the same thing applies to the Texans and the Rockets, because right now you have the Texans that are on the cusp of being potentially the AFC champions or an AFC championship team, let alone a Super Bowl team, because of the talent that they have around them. And then, of course, the Rockets, they're not quite at the level of being an NBA Finals contender yet, but they have a chance to make the playoffs. So the last thing I want is for people of the city of Houston to get this idea that once this storm hits, it's going to lead to success. It's going to lead to a championship. It doesn't work like that. You're not guaranteed to win a championship. You still have to go out and play. It's that simple. And I just think sometimes we tend to overthink the whole sports is healing thing that leads to success. Well, it doesn't always work like that. I've seen Loyola Marymount lose a teammate who tragically passed away after, collapsing on the court. And they made a great NCAA tournament run all the way to the Elite Eight. So it's one of those things that I just think we need to stop getting obsessed with as well. And what's funny? 2022, when the Stros won their second World Series, there was kind of a national tragedy, even though it didn't hit Houston. But the whole Uvalde situation that happened, I know the Stros did more to, show love and support and care for them, and they benefited from that. And that was one of the reasons I don't think it's the main reason. It was not as significant as what Harvey did. But, the whole rallying around this little community that was affected by the tragedy that just happened. And I think in a way it has become so, it was really a touching moment for the team to host these school students in Uvalde to a baseball game. And then also have them announce a draft pick in Los Angeles of all people. So good strategy there, Stros, to win the hearts of the enemy, even though they were trying to boo you madly. So, but my point exactly is, yes, I am concerned and worried about the storm, and I do hope that everyone is prepared and safe as whatever comes in comes in is not as significant. But if it is, then I hope everyone is prepared and hope everyone stays safe. But I just hope that I don't ever feel like it's going to be like 2017 all over again. And I mean, obviously it was a great year, great run, and I might have more talks about the Stros on future podcasts. But right now, my thing is, let's just hope, let's just be ready for this storm, and then whatever comes of it, whatever comes of the rest of the season, and for our sports teams and for this upcoming year, don't think of it as the storm was the reason why. It's the players on the field that perform, players on the playing surface that decide whether or not the city gets a championship. And I still think we'll get another championship in all three teams in the future, but we'll just have to wait and see on that as well. So that's technically my thoughts on the whole thing. And now, folks, we're going to be switching gears over. We're going to be talking about the Green Bay Packers and the whole situation with Jordan Love. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. So we are at least multiple Saturdays or Sundays away from the start of the upcoming 2024 season, and there's definitely a lot of NFL storylines that are coming in. Certainly the biggest one is, can the Kansas City Chiefs make it 3 in a row? Because no NFL team had ever won 3 Super Bowl titles in a row since the start of the Super Bowl era. in 1966. So Kansas City looking to do something that the Cowboys, the Patriots, the Packers, and the 49ers, and the Steelers for that matter, have never been able to do, and that's win 3 straight titles. But there are other storylines as well, and certainly people tend to think about, okay, who outside of Patrick Mahomes would be the best quarterback in the NFL? And you're seeing a lot of names being thrown out there. Of course, Lamar Jackson, he just won his second MVP, would be number 2. Maybe Josh Allen, maybe Joe Burrow. Burrow's coming back after suffering an injury from this past season. Some might still say Aaron Rodgers, but I don't personally think Aaron Rodgers is anywhere near the level that he was. There's still a lot to be said. But one name that has been thrown out there, of course, is C.J. Stroud, and for obvious reasons. He was Rookie of the Year. You know, he led the Texans to a big turnaround to the AFC South Division Championship. They went from 3 wins in 2022 to 10 wins in 2023. And he led them to a big playoff victory over Cleveland and, you know, got them to the divisional round. And so right now, C.J. Stroud seems to be the talk of the next big superstar quarterback in the NFL, even though we're still in that era where it's basically the Mount Rushmore of Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson, just to name a few. But then, of course, you throw in guys like Dak Prescott, who hasn't really developed as much from his play ever since his rookie season. And, I mean, Prescott, to me, he's under the most pressure with the Cowboys. If he doesn't get them to the Super Bowl beyond, he's done with the Cowboys. And I think he needs to go elsewhere because right now the Cowboys are just finding ways to misuse him and, you know, waste his career. But instead of helping him, he's kind of putting himself in a bad spot where he has to try to carry the Cowboys, and it just hasn't quite worked out well, even though he does have some great weapons, with CeeDee Lamb being one of them as well. But there is one other quarterback that I think we need to talk about, and that quarterback is Jordan Love. Now, I kind of find this real interesting. Jordan Love is, after his second season with the Green Bay Packers, had himself a really remarkable year. In fact, he had some numbers that were better than C.J. Stroud throughout his time. But again, he was a sophomore. Stroud was a rookie. But Jordan Love last year completed 64.2% of his passes, almost 4,200 yards, 32 touchdown passes compared to 11 interceptions. And yes, he was sacked 30 times, but he still made up for it by rushing 50 times for 247 yards, 5 rushes of 20 yards or more, including 4 rushing touchdowns, which is more than C.J. Stroud did in his rookie season. And Jordan Love might be the next great Packers quarterback. And I think Jordan Love needs to get a little more recognition and attention. I know most people are so obsessed with C.J. Stroud, as being the next great quarterback as well, but we got to be a little bit cautious with that because Stroud might have a sophomore slump. Now, I don't think it's going to be a bad sophomore slump. I think he might have a regression in terms of the number he throws or he's put down. But then again, you think of Stroud, he had a banged-up offensive line throughout most of the season, and he was missing some key weapons later on down the stretch, and he still was able to put up those kind of numbers. So he might be in a better scenario for this upcoming season. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does have a little bit of regression, but I don't think it's going to be significantly bad that would derail the Texans for the season. Having said that, though, I think we need to start talking about Jordan Love more because right now, the Green Bay Packers are a team that is of curious interest. When we think of the NFC North, every team seems to be in a very good spot. The Detroit Lions are coming off a surprising appearance in the NFC Championship game, winning the NFC North, and they obviously are a front runner for a team that could represent the NFC. Now, I don't know how the 49ers will react after losing the Super Bowl. I don't know if Philadelphia can get themselves back on track after not being able to advance further in the playoffs last season. But I think the Lions might be, at best, the third best team in the NFC. So, that's the way I look at it. But I also think of the Packers, what they did last year. They became the first 7-seeded team in NFL history since the playoff format expanded to 7 teams each to knock off a number 2 seed. They beat the Cowboys. Oh, man. I tell you what, it might be a holiday tradition if the Packers keep beating the Cowboys in Arlington. Let's be realistic here. Not Dallas, Arlington, okay? But, I mean, they not only beat the Cowboys, but they destroyed them. And Jordan Love is a real reason for why that was the case. And then they actually had a big lead on the 49ers, only for San Francisco to come back and win. So, yeah, I mean, Jordan Love right now is in a very interesting scenario where he has an opportunity to be the next great Packers quarterback. And after the season he had last year, some people are starting to think that he might elevate himself to being among the top best. And it wouldn't surprise me if we start seeing Jordan Love maybe in the MVP conversations and such. I mean, I just think he has what it takes to bring the Packers back to the forefront and be up to the next level. So I do think that we need to start paying attention to Jordan Love more, because there are some things that he does that Stroud does better. Now, again, Love has a 1-year advantage on Stroud in terms of NFL experience. So that's still, it is kind of a toss-up between the two of which one you wanted to take. But I think we need to look more into the career, into Jordan Love's career, and to see whether he is the answer for the Green Bay Packers as well. Which brings me to interesting points. As great of a historic franchise as the Packers have been throughout their history, I think the Packers are starting to become, or at least have become, what the 1990s Atlanta Braves were. And the reason I say that, when you think about the Braves of the 1990s, they won 14 straight division titles from 1991 to 2005. 94 was the only year they weren't able to win a division because that was a strike year, and no one actually had a division title, let alone a World Series championship. But they won 14 straight division titles. They appeared in 5 World Series, and yet they've only won 1 championship, which is kind of surprising, because you would think that the Braves teams would have won at least another 2 or 3, depending on how they went. You could argue that the Braves should have won in 1991 against the Minnesota Twins in what is arguably the greatest World Series of all time. You could argue that they should have won in 1996 after taking a 2-0 lead on the New York Yankees. So in hindsight, the Braves should have had at least 3 championships from that run. But they don't. They only have that 1 championship. And that was the only championship the Braves had in the city of Atlanta. Now let's remember, the Braves won a championship when they were in Boston and a championship when they were in Milwaukee. But that was the first championship for the Braves in the city of Atlanta. And that was the case until 16 years later? Yeah, 16 years later. No, wait, 26 years later. I'm off on my math some days. But, yeah, 26 years later when they won the World Series in 2021. But the reason I bring this up is because the Packers, in my mind, are in the same boat. I mean, Green Bay was blessed to have 2 of the greatest quarterbacks of all time with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers from 1992 to 2022. That's 30 years of NFL luxury of having 2 of the best ever. And yet, despite all the MVPs that the 2 of them have won combined, despite all the times that the Packers were in playoff contention, they have never been able to develop themselves into a team that can win more than the amount of championships that they've won. Brett Favre's Packers made it to 2 Super Bowls in 96 and 97, and they split the 2 years. Aaron Rodgers' only appearance in a Super Bowl with the Packers was 2010, and he won a Super Bowl then. But from that, despite all the success, Green Bay has never been able to get themselves back to being that title contender that from the days of Vince Lombardi and the days before Vince Lombardi came in. So it just makes you wonder, why have the Green Bay Packers not been able to get themselves back to the Super Bowl, or at least won more championships? Some may argue it's because other teams, stepped up and performed really well. Some may argue that the Packers underperformed during the seasons, even when they won division titles, because Green Bay would more often than not have to go on the road to try to win against the road opponents, and they may have a game where they win on the road, but then they lose the game on the road, in the NFC Championship game for that matter. And it just makes you wonder. It just makes you think that maybe Green Bay is cursed. Maybe Green Bay is going through that phase where they just can never get over the hump despite having some great players. Is it because they were unable to build around both Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers? Or is it maybe because the quarterbacks themselves found ways to screw up at critical moments and lose games? Brett Favre, 2 times in the playoffs throughout his career, he threw costly interceptions that led to the opponents winning the game with field goals. He threw an interception against the Eagles in 2003, and he threw an interception in 2007 against the Giants, which ended up sending them to the Super Bowl. So, and then you think more about Aaron Rodgers. His misfortune has just been not so much mistakes that he made, but that the Packers just weren't good enough and that they choked away some big games. You think back to 2014 or 2011. Let's start there. I mean, I talked briefly about this in one of my podcasts earlier, but 2011, Packers were 15-1. They lose their one and only playoff game to the Giants in Lambeau Field, and they got destroyed that game. 2013 or 2014, actually, they reached the NFC Championship game against the Seattle Seahawks. They lead 16-0, then 19-7, and then they choked the game away in overtime. In 2015, Aaron Rodgers throws a big Hail Mary pass right to a wide receiver to tie the game against the Cardinals. But back then, NFL rules were sudden death overtime. The Cardinals won the toss. They got the ball. They went down and scored a touchdown. Game over. Then, pretty much, the Packers made it to the AFC Championship game in 2016, but failed to beat Atlanta. They have not been able to get themselves back. They lose a home playoff game to the 49ers, of all teams. And then in the year where they finally had the first matchup between Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, the Packers were only down by 8 points. Rodgers should have ran the ball in and possibly scored a touchdown to set up for a potential 2-point conversion. He doesn't. He throws an incomplete pass. Green Bay then decides to kick a field goal. And they lose the game to Tampa Bay. So it's mind-boggling for how many times, and I know Packer fans are, frustrated by the lack of success that they had despite being one of the top teams in the NFL playoffs. But the Green Bay Packers, they're like the Braves in the 1990s. Let's just put it that way. You should have won more championships, at least. I'm not saying you should have won all 30 times. I think you probably would have benefited from having another 3 championships, which would make it mean you would be the most successful franchise in all of the NFL. Not the Patriots, not the Cowboys, not the 49ers, and certainly not the Steelers. But that's just one of those missed opportunities that Green Bay has had. You know how many times I've watched this show called NFL's Greatest Games, and more often than not, whenever I see the Packers, they're usually on the losing side. I think they've been on more times on the losing side than they have been on the winning side, for that matter, in those games themselves. So it's real mind-boggling to see a franchise as historic as that go through that period. But having said all that, I do think that this year's Packers team could be a threat to win the NFC North, again, over the Detroit Lions. And I do think they have a potential to make a run all the way to the NFC Championship game and maybe get themselves to a Super Bowl. Maybe. But it's going to depend on what Jordan Love does because, well, I was a little bit wrong on the number of years he was there, because he's actually been there for 4 years now that I think about it. But, he's still kind of young. He's only appeared in 27 games, and last season was his first full year with the team. And, he's yet to win 10 games in his career, but he had a really good year last year, and he might be able to develop into that same type of quarterback. So, of all the quarterbacks, I would think he would be the one with the most potential, like the biggest sleeper of a quarterback, let's put it that way, of all the quarterbacks that you can think of in the NFL as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Love does take the next step to being put among the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, even though it's a crowded quarterback room at the top, because we're seeing a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of young quarterbacks step up. It's not just with C.J. Stroud or Jordan Love, but it's also, with Brock Purdy or Jalen Hurts or any of that. Like, you have your current top 4 quarterbacks in the NFL, and then you have the young guns coming in. And then you have some of the other young guns that haven't really developed and stepped up their game, but have a chance to do so this season. Bryce Young, he had a bad year, but that was not really his fault, because the Panthers were just a bad franchise. Anthony Richardson got off to a decent start. Unfortunately, hasn't been able to, didn't finish the season, and now there's going to be questions about him if he can really stay healthy, even though that was just his rookie season. And he might be a threat for the AFC South Championship. Let's put it that way. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence, who has been very inconsistent right now. I mean, none of the quarterbacks in the 2021 draft class, which was the most hyped up class in years, hasn't really developed. And I mean, there's definitely some big concerns for that class as well. Somebody who needs to step up for them, or else they're going to be remembered as the biggest bust of a draft class in the history of the NFL from a quarterback perspective, to say the least. So that's just the way I look at it. I think Green Bay could be a team to watch out, and I think Jordan Love should be a guy that we need to keep an eye on for. And the dogs that are in the house are barking right now. I apologize. They are barking over something. Hey! Knock it off! Sorry about that. I'm currently in my parents' house. We got 4 dogs here, and I think only 2 of them are inside at the moment. So, but yeah, so that's just the way I look at it. Green Bay should be a team to watch out for with Jordan Love, and I think he could take the next step. So I don't think he's going to be a contention for the MVP this season, but I think in the next few years, if he continues to develop, we could see him in the MVP conversation. So with all that being said, folks, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. Again, if you are in the line of hurricane or tropical storm Beryl, which might turn back into a hurricane, just stay safe, be prepared, and if you do have internet and Wi-Fi or electricity and you have the chance, please feel free to subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Podbean, and also to my YouTube channel at KWCLINE91. So, folks, this is Kenneth the K-Rock Klein, wishing you a very enjoyable weekend, and for those that may be, and staying safe out there for everyone along the Texas Gulf Coast for this upcoming storm. So I'll hopefully get back on when I have a chance. I might be busy with a road trip I have planned out as well, but eventually I will get back on soon, and I hope that Mark T. Robinson and I can find time to do our podcast, our other podcast, Two Pals on a Pod, when we can. So until then, stay safe, have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you guys next time on Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with